Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Katherine Sellery. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you so much to all of you and Charlene for that beautiful introduction. I'm so excited to be here and to get started and to provide a new context for parenting. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to start looking at what is required to actually build stronger relationships with your children, your teens, your adolescents. And so when we look at that, we think to ourselves, what does that even mean? So for me, what I hear a lot of the time is, why won't they just listen to me? And I'm imagining that a lot of you are like, yeah, could you help me out with that? So this is unfortunately one of those things that gets asked most frequently. So let's dive in and see if we can figure it out. So when we're talking about discipline, most parents are using a controlling form of discipline that's authoritarian, or sometimes it's called a power over approach. And it uses threats or fear-based tactics to get the behavioral change. If you don't clean up your room, you can't go to the party this weekend. It utilizes judgments, rewards, and punishments to reinforce learning. You did such a good job on your last test. I've decided to let you stay up late this week. It seeks control by making demands. I need you to get off your game and set the table right now. It's as if, as parents, we had a remote control and we could get the behavioral change just by pushing a button. And so it would look something like this. And I know everybody wants to buy one of these. So you push a button to get them to do their homework, to clean up their room, to go to bed on time, to say please and thank you, to do their chores, don't answer back. It would be so extraordinary if we could just all get the remote control. And that's essentially what we're doing with rewards and punishments and threats, is we're trying to get them, just like a button, to cause our child, as if they were like a television set, to change channel. But unfortunately, our kids are not like appliances, and they have feelings and needs and emotions. And sometimes these tactics actually are so contrary to what we want to have as outcomes. So let's talk about when we're using these approaches to discipline to create behavioral change, what is it that we believe about children and their behavior? It's as though children are attention-seeking or manipulative, intentionally disobedient, that they've got to learn. And this is learning self-discipline, not as we tie them to the chair. So give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Spare the rod, spoil the child. If you don't come down hard on children's behavior, it'll just keep on happening. If we give in to children, they'll have won and we'll have lost. So we don't, I think, find that any of these are uncommon. I hear them so often. Well, they've got to learn. Well, yeah, give them an inch, they will take a mile. This is a deeply ingrained belief that we don't even realize is something that we could question until we compare it to ageism and racism. So if I said Greeks are attention-seeking, manipulative, and intentionally disobedient, you're probably laughing and like, oh my God, that's ridiculous, because it's clearly blatantly prejudiced. New Zealanders have got to learn. Give Southerners an inch and they'll take a mile. I am, incidentally, from the Deep South. Spare the rod and spoil the elderly. If you don't come down hard on Italians, they're going to keep misbehaving. If we give in to Russians, they'll have won and we'll have lost. So with this, we can see that when we put a race in, we clearly laugh about it. It is blatantly a prejudice. But when we have it as children, we don't see the ageism, that we actually aren't even aware that we have a negative view we're projecting onto the behavior that we're seeing, that it isn't neutral, that we bring with it a lot. And this is one of the main things in terms of a context shift that's going to help us to reap a completely different outcome and actually to get those children to listen to us. The other thing has to do with something we're going to call developmental versus behavioral. And so here's the example. If you look at this word and how it's spelled in English, there's a convention, I before E except after C. So clearly the word is spelled wrong, but I don't believe any of you who are out there tonight are thinking to yourself, well, she just needs to go to her room. Because it doesn't even evoke that sense of badness or wrongness. because it's a developmental mistake and you expect me to make it until I learn the spelling convention. So there isn't any charge with it. But it gives rise to something incredibly important. There are different assumptions about developmental versus behavioral errors. So let's look at what those are. If it's a developmental mistake, we have the thought that they're trying to get it right. It was just an accident. If it's a behavioral mistake, we actually think that children are trying to get things wrong, and it's deliberate, and it's a punishable mistake. If it's developmental, learning requires exploration. Behaviorally, they should not explore rules and limits. Mastery requires practice, and mistakes are inevitable. But with behavior, we don't have that same bandwidth. They should not make behavioral mistakes. Children who have difficulty achieving developmental expectations need additional support. But with behavior, children who have difficulty achieving developmental expectations should be punished. So we don't think to calm our children down when it's a behavioral mistake because of this belief that it would be rewarding bad behavior. So just this one shift in perspective to be able to challenge yourself about this belief that I would be rewarding bad behavior, but you wouldn't even think in those terms if it was a developmental mistake. In fact, if they were struggling with anything, chances are you're going to look for extra support. You're going to try to bolster their confidence. You're going to help them not develop a bad sense of self. You're going to be their partner, supporting them, as opposed to criticizing, punishing, and thinking that what they've done, they've got to learn, right? So this is going to be a big theme as we continue through this evening about this beliefs about children. So what's the bottom line? Parenting that focuses on what's wrong with children or what's wrong with their actions relies on the belief that scolding them, making them feel bad, punishing them is going to motivate them to act differently. And I'm going to challenge that belief. So as we dive in, we're going to identify the problem. Using threats or this fear-based approach to get behavioral change will sometimes yield behavioral change, but not for the reasons we want, not out of consideration. And it's going to cause resentment flows. And that's going to become a really big deal. We're going to talk about that in a second. And utilizing judgments, rewards, punishments to reinforce learning conditions the children to decide on their actions based on what's going to happen to them. So you're training the mind of the child to be thinking not about what's the impact of my behavior on other people and teaching them to be considerate of other people's experience of their behavior. It focuses the mind of the child on what do I get for my obedience, or what are the prices that I'm going to pay for not complying, which even raises a separate subject around the idea of training children to be obedient and compliant, which is dangerous. But that's a separate issue aside from the point we're making here. So using threats or fear-based tactics to get the behavioral change, even though it's going to yield it, doesn't necessarily mean that's the way we want to get it. And this seeking of control by making demands rather than requests activates the retaliation, the rebellion, and the resistance. So with obedience and compliance, the problem, among other things, is that aside from activating the 3 R's, which we'll talk more about, it also is very hard for kids to distinguish between who in power they're supposed to be obedient and compliant to. A lot of studies have been done on this. Maybe you've heard about some of them. But just anyone in power, do I become obedient and compliant to them? And lots of children are put at risk when their behavior is to be obedient and compliant rather than considerate. So teaching, and this is the big distinction, teaching children to be considerate is a very different job than teaching them to be obedient and compliant. But it's important that we make the distinction so that we realize the risks if we're teaching them just to attend to whoever has the most power in the room. There are limitations to punishment, and 2 questions that reveal that are, number 1, what do I want the person to do? Number 2, what do I want the person's reasons to be for doing it? And rewards and punishments interfere with a person's motivation. They may achieve the desired outcome, but rarely for the reasons that we want, out of consideration, them valuing this choice, choosing it themselves. Those are the reasons we want. The reasons that they actually comply are they're afraid of the punishment. They're afraid of the fear of parents rejecting them. They're afraid of upsetting other people or their parents. They want to avoid being shamed or guilt. They are afraid that the hope for reward will be withheld. So when we ease off on the power and the control and we develop closer relationships, we actually have more influence and more of the ability to actually get our children to understand the reasoning behind our recommendations or our requests. We sacrifice that. We actually hurt the closeness. And as a result, our influence goes down, even though we might get the result we want. It isn't for the reasons we want. And actually, we want it to be for the reasons we want, because we want that to be self-started behavioral change. Because self-started behavioral change means that I get it. I get why this is the idea of doing it this way is better. And I'm going to choose it versus someone being made to do it because they're afraid of what's going to happen if they don't. The 3 R's, Dr. Thomas Gordon was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 times for his research, which identified that when you use controlling discipline, it activates retaliation, rebellion, and resistance. And Dr. Louise Porter, who's a leading child psychologist and parent education specialist, in her research discovered that the 3 R's account for 75% of all childhood behavioral disruptions. So what that means is, in this land of a new context, that, wow, now that I understand the 3 R's and what's being activated, what we're going to call all of these secondary problems, when I use a controlling form of discipline, all I have to do is learn another approach, which we call the guidance approach to parenting, which incidentally is the program that I wrote with Dr. Louise Porter. And by using a guidance approach to parenting, we don't activate the 3 R's. We therefore eliminate 3 out of 4 behavioral disruptions, which leaves us with just 1, which is so much easier to handle than 1 plus all the others. So we support ourselves as parents by learning a different approach that's so much more effective and doesn't create all of the secondary problems. And we're going to see more about that. So we reduce these incidents just by amending our approach. So let's look at a few examples of the power over, because it shows us everything. This is the dance of anger and defiance. If you look in the middle of this example, you see the demand. And so mom said, Allie, could you pick up your toys? Which, it doesn't sound like a demand. It sounds like it was a request. And it actually, based on the way she responded, she didn't hear it as a request. And so the resistance is there, and you can see the resistance. And so mom gets into threatening. All right, if you don't do it, no dessert. And then you can see, she says, well, she just rebels and says, well, I don't even like that stupid dessert. And so then it gets harsher. In this case, she turns it over to Ray. Ray, could you deal with this, please? So then Ray comes in and says, you got to do what mom says. Why? Because I do. And she's just like, no, I won't do it. And so she retaliates when he starts pushing her to do it. And he's using more and more power and more coercion. And she's getting more and more defiant. So then it finally gets to, fine, 1, 2, 3, that old 1, 2, 3 magic didn't work. And ultimately, okay, there it is. No TV for a week. The harsh punishment steps in. She escapes, runs out of the room, and then slams the door and says, I hate you, Daddy. So that I hate you, Daddy, the slamming of the door, all of those are what we call secondary problems, which have gotten us so far away from the primary issue of having her help mom pick up her toys. We aren't even in the same stratosphere any longer. And so what we can see from this is that not only does it not solve the problem, but now I have a whole bunch of additional problems. And this is going on. And this is what I would call an autonomous child who is coming up against power and control. And if you have a child like this, you know it, because these are the children who are prepared to risk your displeasure in order to continue to be self-directed. And autonomy is actually one of our primary needs, but it's not very accepted in children. And this is not to say that we sacrifice our requests, but it is to say that when your request is actually a demand that doesn't allow for a yes/no response or doesn't integrate the other person's perspective into it or into the conversation, With a belonger, somebody who is got the disposition of how you feel about me makes me feel good or bad about myself, more like a people pleaser, they will adjust their behavior. And an autonomous child will just dig in, draw a line, and won't change their behavior, and actually will prove that you can't make them change their behavior. If you have those children, this may be the first time you've had a context to understand what actually is going on underneath the surface. The 3 R's. So when we say you need to do X or else, that is activating the 3 R's. How do your kids usually respond to this type of parenting? Angry, talk back, shut down, scream, cry. Progress toward the goal breaks down. You may get them to do it, but they'll make you pay for it by being resentful. And you never want to have to pay for other people's behavior with their resentment flow. So stop them before they can start resenting you. So the guidance approach, as opposed to this traditional controlling form of discipline, behavioralist power over, it uses requests rather than demands, which is teaching through consideration by modeling consideration. Developing an internal locus of causality. In other words, it's about me choosing it, not about what people are going to do to me in the form of a reward or a punishment. So we no longer are conditioning the mind of the child to focus on what they're going to get or what's going to happen to them. And we help them to start focusing on my experience of their behavior so that they can learn to be considerate of other people's needs rather than focused on what they're going to get or what's going to happen to them. So using acknowledgments rather than judgments, and judgments include praise as well as criticism, the positive and the negative judgments of children. Both of them are equally deleterious in their effect. Each of these parenting styles responds to disruptive behavior differently based on these various beliefs that we have about children and their trustworthiness, as we talked about earlier, the negative view of children, as well as how we explain to ourselves what the cause of the inappropriate behavior is, which again goes back to the developmental versus the behavior itself. Developmentally appropriate, or is the behavior in the land of, oh, it's inappropriate, it's misbehaving, it's naughty. So how we describe the behavior. With the controlling form, we use external causes as the explanation, or the desired behavior isn't being rewarded enough, or the undesired behavior is being accidentally rewarded. So remember, rewards and punishments are based on this paradigm. So in that case, it's a very limited approach to understanding the behavior itself. The developmental inexperience could explain it. Natural exuberance, exploration, lack of information, lapses in self-control, reactions to power being used on them. We have a much wider palette of the ways that we think about the disruptive behaviors when we're looking at them, so that we have also a much wider response. So realizing that we've internalized these negative views about children, understanding that these beliefs inform our response, we are actually inadvertently inflaming the situation. It is as if we are pouring gasoline on a fire. So instead of us supporting children in overwhelm, reactive children are going to be inflamed. And what we really need to do is help them by co-regulating their emotions until they can regain control. We do that when we step away from rewards and punishments and go to your rooms, and we begin to look at their responses as them being an overwhelm, them having trouble managing there's something inside of themselves that had its own plan and the plan outside of themselves. And the idea is to help them be able to verbalize, not necessarily that we give in to them. That's not what we're talking about. This is not permissive parenting, but it is integrating the child, the adolescent, the teen, the young adult, and what's going on for them as though we're having a conversation so that everybody's needs are taken into consideration. We shift from power and control to guidance and support. We break the habit. We model consideration and compassion. So, am I requesting or am I demanding? Kind of started going there a little bit. A demand is, I need you to get off your laptop and help me with the dishes. A request is, would you be willing to help me with the dishes? So then an autonomous child chooses it. And you'd be amazed because autonomous children will choose. The more people hear demands, though, the more control they feel and the less they like being around us. Requests allow the other person the opportunity to help meet our needs out of consideration. As a result, they feel valued and appreciated. If we believe events outside determine our well-being, we have an external locus of causality. How I think, feel, act as a result of what's happened to me or what I get. So this is actually the cornerstone of rewards and punishments, right? Is that we believe that depending on what we do, we can get them to change. So if we believe we determine our own well-being, then we have an internal locus of causality. And it's basically, I get to determine how I think, feel, and act, regardless of what's going on around me. A lot more freedom in that. As parents, which one are we cultivating in our children, and which one would we like them to have? So there are tons of examples where we blame external forces. There's the vague, impersonal example where, well, I tidied up because I had to, or our condition, personality, or history. Oh, I've always been like that. Or the actions of others. Well, he started it. The dictates of authority. Well, I was just following orders. Or group pressure. Everybody else is doing it. Policies, rules, regulations. That's our policy. My hands are tied. Gender, age, social roles. I have to cook. I'm the mother. Uncontrollable impulses. I couldn't help myself. So with each one of these examples, what we're lacking is accountability. It's not, I chose it. It's not, regardless of what you did, I choose this. It's breaking the cycle of victim blame consciousness. And in fact, the problem with rewards and punishments is that, again, it's focusing the mind on what the other is going to do, and other people are telling me, and I'm so focused on all of this external that I don't actually learn and become accountable for my own behavior. I don't say, I did it because I did it. I say, I did it because look at what they did to me. We need to break that cycle so that everyone becomes accountable for their choices. Cultivating an external locus of causality actually fosters an unhealthy self-concept. So it fosters socially prescribed perfectionism, which is the unhealthy form of perfectionism. Individuals feel unworthy, therefore believe that they have to prove their worth by outdoing others or by being perfect. They're prone to anxiety and depression. They procrastinate. They have low self-esteem and low self-efficacy. Fostering an internal locus of causality, when our kids to be accountable for their actions and to know that how they respond is not through some knee-jerk thing, but based on what others do or say, they have command over themselves. They have command over how they feel about things, how they respond to things. To overcome justification for their own actions and behaviors based on what other people did or say. It's crucial in maturity to get to this point. Healthy self-esteem is rooted in the principle of assessing my own behavior and cultivating the attitude of what you think about me is none of my business, but tells me a lot about you, your judgments of me or your judgments of the situation, but it's all about you. What you think about me is none of my business. So this is not lacking consideration, but this is helping our children be free of people pleasing, be free of people who want to manipulate them. Self-referenced perfectionism is the healthy form. And this is where individuals strive for high achievement because they know they're capable of it. They judge their outcomes according to progress made in their own performances and seek to master skills for their own satisfaction at becoming competent. And they don't compare themselves to other people and then decide if they can be proud of themselves or not. So it's focusing on the internal locus that provides the foundation for this type of healthy perfectionism. And we talk about like, what are the ingredients that are necessary? We break the judgment. You're being so disrespectful. And we use language of acknowledgement. When you speak to me that way, it's hard for me to stay connected and not blame you for how I feel. You did so well, I'm so proud of you, versus I can see you're so proud of yourself. For a child, judgments link self-worth to their ability to meet other people's expectations. If I'm not being polite, my parents won't listen to me. I can't fall apart and be loved. I have to be perfect to be heard, seen, or to matter. I don't know how to do that all the time. What am I going to do? And kids just get stuck because they're going to not be perfect. I have to do well in order for my parents to be proud of me. Well, we can be proud of our children when they're making mistakes, can't we? We can just let them know that making mistakes in our house is perfectly fine. We love you, even when you're just being human. So is praise a judgment? Yes. If you want to lower a child's self-esteem, praise them. Praise statements, although well-intentioned, are still evaluatory, impart our opinion about the performance. They lower children's self-esteem as they are trained to feel good about themselves based on what other people say. Acknowledgement such as, wow, did you know you could do that? Maintains a child's internal locus of causality. Behavior is a reflection of needs being met or a reflection of needs not being met. Needs are innate. We don't learn that we need to eat or be loved, but are born requiring these fundamentals. The satisfaction of needs is vital to our well-being, and conversely, unmet needs cause suffering. So, we have a right to defend ourselves when our needs are not being met. It's important that we do it. Children are people too, and they have that same need for autonomy as adults do, but don't have the same skill to meet their needs. And when child's needs are not being met, they don't have the skill to communicate this or regulate their emotions, which results in those problematic behaviors and being flooded with feelings. We refer to these signaling behaviors as the tragic expression of the unmet need. The presence of the 3 R's indicates that the children don't feel heard and that we need to amend our approach. However, that doesn't mean we should ignore the behavior. So when young children or teens are communicating their feelings in ways that are objectionable to us, it's easy to think that they are the problem. Anger, annoyance, irritation are likely the result when we focus on ourselves and how the behavior affects us. Instead, we need to see the behaviors as attempts to communicate. And listen, behavior is one of adults' loudest forms of communication. So how do we behave when we're upset? Are we confrontational? Do we tend to retreat and back into ourselves? What kinds of cues and clues and signals do we send? Do we leave those around us to determine the cause of our mood through our behavior? It's the same thing with children. Behavior is their loudest form of communication. So think about it. How do your kids behave when they're upset? What are the signals or the cues and clues that they send to you? And while in conflict, recognizing that your children are trying to communicate their needs will help you take a step back and respond more effectively. So the decoding that we're talking about requires deep listening. So it's with the intention to empower rather than instruct, compel, advise, solve their problems for them. It provides a safe haven, being genuine in our desire to help, allows them to direct the conversation. With the attitude of acceptance, we see our kids as separate individuals, trust them to be able with support to solve problems. We accept their feelings. We don't have to agree with them, but that's what they're going through. And we're willing to take the time to listen. So bad behavior is not a reflection of me. And depersonalizing is critical. Be curious when they say the no to you, because they are saying yes to something inside themselves. And this is the context again. It's not disrespectful. It's a yes to something that they're trying to be respectful of inside of themselves, and they haven't got the skill yet to manage how to do that and also have a conversation with you about it. And the negative view of children, of course, has something to do with that. So the skills for that decoding or interpreting what teens are telling us and correcting errors as they occur is that we work at their pace, communicate our attendance non-verbally. We put our phones down and we just really connect with them. We listen for their thoughts, feelings, meaning. We vary our reflective statements and we connect emotionally, offering empathy, not pity. And, this whole approach, as long as we get away from the controlling and not activate the 3 R's, because the 3 R's indicates that we need to change our approach and get rid of those 75% of behavioral disruptions. Adopting a guidance approach and decoding children's behavior will naturally lead to less conflict in the home and stronger relationships with your kids. Children need our compassion the most when they appear to deserve it the least. So for those of you who have a phone, I'm delighted to give you my ebook on 7 strategies to keep your relationship with your kids from hitting the boiling point. You can go to freeparentingbook.com or you can just scan that QR code. And in either case, that will be in your inbox and give you some more support about managing conflict resolution. And Charlene is going to join me for some questions from the audience now, and I look forward to hearing what's come up for you guys.
Well, that was a lot, Catherine. That was incredible. You said you were going to get through a lot of material, and you did.
I did it. I'm so happy with myself.
All right, let's start out by clarifying a question that has been coming up in the chat. People are really interested in that piece about praise. We know Carol Dweck from Stanford has done a lot of work in this. We recommend her book Mindsets if you want the backstory. But if you could tell people why,
yes,
your words, it doesn't work to take the ownership of praise.
Yeah. So again, what we want is that we want our children to develop high self-esteem. Self-esteem is not what you think about me. Self-esteem is like, how do I feel about me? Am I happy with me even if you're not happy with me? Can you see the benefit to that? So praise trains the mind, again, to be looking for other people's praise. Am I praiseworthy? Do other people accept me? Do other people like me? Do other people think well of me? And really, what you think about me is none of my business, right? I am free if I stop looking for 100% of the planet to accept and love me. But I really want to feel good about me. And so, did you think you could do that? Wow, congratulations. It looked like you worked really hard on that. You must feel so proud of yourself. And so this is that reflecting back part, so that they begin to develop their own internal locus of causality, their own sense of, yeah, I worked really hard on that. And I am so proud of myself.
And see, it's a subtle distinction. Once I studied Carol Dweck's work, I flipped it like you did, but using that word, you must feel, is very different than saying you should be proud of yourself.
Right? Oh, totally. Yeah, exactly. So that one, I'm so proud of you, right? I know we all grew up with it, and I know we probably all said it to our children. And now that I have that depth of insight, of course, from the work that she did, is the ability for me to recognize that, oh my gosh, why would I ever say that to someone? And have them worried about, like, I wonder if my behavior is going to make mom proud of me or dad proud of me, or are they not going to be proud of me? Or what if I don't make the mark? And this is where the research shows that it makes children anxious. They become less prepared to take on difficult tasks because they're afraid to fail. And so if you want your children to be more interested in risk-taking and doing stuff that they haven't already mastered and have that mindset, which is what she calls it, then we have to break the habit of praise and move into what's called acknowledgement.
Such a good point, Catherine, such a good point. My son was a praise junkie at 2, and I had to pick him up because he kept saying, is it right, Mommy? Did I do it right? And I thought, oh, this is not good.
I know. And it's so great you caught it so young.
Something else that people really responded to, and I think this is very critical because people were mentioning trauma. If you could mention again what you mean about the difference between compliance and consideration.
Oh, for sure. It's the cornerstone, isn't it? So we have basically given a context for understanding what I believe most people don't have, or haven't really thought about. Like, what do I really believe if I think I need to use power and control? And we don't think about it. We just do what's been done, right? Or what we see being done. Again, right? What's been modeled for us and what we've grown up with and what we see being modeled by other parents. And actually, parents might even be like judgmental. There could be some mommy shaming going on if you don't come down hard on them. So it's a really important thing to understand that what you're really teaching a child to do is be afraid of you. Right. So obedience and compliance works on the basis of fear and dependence. If I'm afraid of you and I'm dependent on you for those goodies, then I am going to be manipulated by you. And once you train someone to do that long enough and over time, they can't distinguish who do I obey, who do I not obey. So if you look at the studies on child sexual abuse,
yes,
right? And the largest study ever done on child sexual abuse. I mean, this is a study that I've read. And basically what we learn is that the perpetrator, when they were asked, how'd you get away with it? They said children didn't even know they were allowed to object.
such an important point. Parents, do listen to Katherine. You want your child to complain if their boundaries are crossed.
Yes.
You want them to.
We want them to stay connected to their inner voice. We want parents to have an opportunity to see this context differently.
Yes.
That no to them is not disrespectful. We
Yes.
may find it inconvenient. We may not like it. We might wish that they were just always cooperative. But with this insight that no to you is actually a yes to something inside of themselves, that they're trying to stand for something. And it may be that it's, what do I want to call it? It's thoughtless, or they're not thinking about the others in the room, that it's, developmentally, you can see that it's not very mature, all of those other explanations that support us to see the bad behavior through the lens of a guidance approach. So that when you do have that lens, you have more choices, developmental inexperience, lack of skill, all of the other things that we understand. If it's going back to the idea of, if it's something that they're learning in school, we never think about punishing them because we already have that context. It's so strong. But when it comes to behavior, for some reason, we go into this wild other thing. I think one of the reasons is that we are embarrassed when our children are in public and they're not behaving politely. Yeah. Because we value politeness, we value consideration, we value our children having that skill. And when they don't have it, somehow we take it personally, which is why I said you got to depersonalize. This is really just a child being 4 or 6 or even 12. They're all learning and they're learning skills. And this is just another skill. So if we can depersonalize and see them as drowning, and that they're just in this quagmire, they don't know how to be connected to themselves and their inner voice, and at the same time taking this outer voice that's got its whole other agenda. And I've got my own agenda and you've got your agenda for me. And what am I going to do now? And if you use power and control, I can tell you what's going to happen. You're going to activate retaliation, rebellion, and resistance. Yeah. And if you use guidance, you're not going to activate retaliation, rebellion, and resistance. You're going to activate connection, conversation, wonder, curiosity. And some people say, oh my God, I don't have time for that. I just want him to do as I told. And I'm like, I know. But here's the thing. It's a good trade-off. You may spend more time initially, but not in the long run, because you're not going to have the same disruptive behavior over and over and over and over and over again, because you've finally taken whatever that thing is that's going on inside of them into consideration, because children are people too.
And you make such a good point that the kids who are most difficult need it the most, right?
Or they do, The children that seem to deserve it the least, right, need our compassion the most. And if that can just stick with us when we're in the flare of the moment and all we want to do is, strangle them or whatever, right? We just get so mad sometimes and triggered because of the language and the story we're telling ourselves about them. And I just want to drive that point home. So if I'm telling myself that this is disrespectful, that you're trying to manipulate me, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that's what I'm activating within myself are feelings of rage, anger. I'm going to be so mad. And that's because of the story I'm telling myself. And I have 100% control over that story. So now I can change the narrative and I can say to myself, I don't like it, but darn it, they're still learning how to behave. And they haven't mastered how to be thoughtful. And they're still struggling with meeting the outer world's expectations and what they want. And you see, we can just go on and on and on. And the more we can change the narrative and how we're explaining the situation to ourselves, it's almost like we give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. We give ourselves breathing room for us to stay in command of ourselves before we go and blow it spectacularly.
Yes. Like Dr. Ross Green talks about, Katherine, just as you did. Children with problems have unmet needs. If we can take the heat out of the problem, we can address it.
Absolutely. Beautifully said, right? Just exactly like that. If we look at things as the tragic expression of the unmet need, rather than badfulness, needfulness, and then how can I support you to meet your needs? Because the minute we support you to meet your needs, your feelings shift.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, parents, this is a lot. It's subtle, but it's really important advice. Everything Katherine has said tonight. So here's a question that I think is a good basic one. What do you do if you make a request and your child says no?
Yes, that's a good one. So, because this is going to happen like when we hang up
every day. Yeah.
So that's, I guess first step is take a deep breath, because that's the classic example of them saying no to you, but we know they're saying yes to something inside of themselves. Mm-hmm. So we put our agenda to the side. I guess you could also check in, right? If you're doing the would you be willing to, and they're like, no, thank you. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I still need you to pick up your dishes or, contribute in whatever way. And it usually relates to things like chores, contribution, that sort of thing. So they're saying no to you and yes to something inside of themselves. Well, I have no idea what they're saying yes to. And I bet you do, or maybe you don't. I'm not sure, right? So the key is to just kind of get curious and say, I see. So it's really hard for you to say yes to me because there's something going on inside of you that can't figure out how to do that and what I'd like. Is that it? And chances are they're going to be in a conversation with you now.
Yeah.
And now they're going to say, yeah, can't you see, Mom? I'm in the middle of my favorite show or my game or my book or whatever it is. And you'll be like, I get it. So for you, it's like, how can you leave this thing that you're in the middle of? A lot of kids that come home and they kind of just calm down by playing their favorite game. Mm-hmm. And getting to the next level is really important. Mm-hmm. And so you're asking them to do something and they're not at the next level yet. And they've been working for 20 minutes to get to the next level and you're trying to get them to stop. Mm-hmm. And instead, what they really need is for you to help them postpone the thing that you want them to do, which they're probably okay doing. At least this is my experience. They're just not okay doing it this instant. But the main thing is that we open up conversation, and now we're in what we call collaborative problem solving.
Exactly. So here is that very question asked, because again, this is, as Bev and I say, no matter what we do, no matter what the topic, we always end with talking about video games. So here we go. Yeah. The question is, how do you recommend getting a child to limit video games and go to bed when you've already had multiple discussions about their health and how their brains need rest and all of that? Yes.
So two things. And I mean, it is a huge conversation. Yes. So I love for children to learn self-control rather than outer control. So, this is the whole arc. We're going from control to less and less and less control and more self-started behavioral change, more and more self-control. We want them to control themselves, whether you're there to make them do it or not. We want them to internalize the value around sleep hygiene, around understanding the downside, around all of the things you're worried about. And if they don't internalize those things, they won't change their behavior on their own. And then it turns into a battle of wills. And then we've got the 3 R's everywhere and everything breaks down. So it's not the use of power and force and control will always result in that. Now, I just want to have a caveat here. There's something called the protective use of force as well. And when you're using protective force, it's not to gain obedience and compliance, right? It really is, you're protecting them from having their reputation destroyed, maybe. You're protecting them from a negative outcome. So I like to say with my clients, we work on first helping them find their own enough that we all feel is okay. And that's the best case scenario, is that a child can do that. And I've seen lots of kids do it. And it does take conversation again. And it sounds like in this particular person's case, they've already had a lot of conversations and they've talked about the net tangible effect on them and the negative things that are going to happen. And the child still can't stop gaming on their own. So we're probably in the land of, I believe, protective use of force. Like, I would really love for you on your own to turn it off at the end of an hour, let's say. And I'm noticing you're having a lot of trouble doing that. Yeah. And I know you're going to be mad at me. And I don't want you to be mad at me because I'm not doing this out of anything but love. But I know that it's important to protect you from having overstimulation an hour before bed or whatever it is. And so we have to create the conditions for success. I'd love for you to see that and to be able to take that action. And at the same time, if you can't do it, I'm going to do it with you. This is kind of like co-regulating, right? So until you can take the step yourself, we're going to do it together. And I really love for you to understand that this is for your own protection. Now, here's the deal. If kids have not already developed resentment flows, you can actually probably have that conversation where there are no resentment flows in the environment already. But my guess is that there are already resentment flows. So it will be hard for them not to experience this as you controlling them, even though that's not your come from anymore. But until you also start removing power and control in other areas, they won't be able to sense and feel into the distinction between the two, because there's actually a huge, like you could drive a truck through the two. They're so different. But again, it is a distinction of where you're coming from. And one is the protective use of force, and one is force being used for obedience. Because I said so, like Raymond said.
So, Katherine, we have so many wonderful questions coming in. I wish we had time for all of them, but let's try for 2 more. Okay. This one may be a little outside your wheelhouse, but I want to ask it because I think it's important. Parent asks, I have a neuroatypical son who sees everything in black and white, will not come off his stance no matter what. Any last ditch advice for situations like that where they have to listen to someone?
I love that question. And it is actually, I've worked with a lot of families. And so the first thing I would say is, I wonder if, and we didn't get into it, but, we talk about the things that we do instead of really listening, and we call them the roadblocks. And if you're using the roadblocks when your child is, sort of really trying to get you to understand his position, the best way to diffuse him, and the only hope you'll ever have of him understanding your side, is to listen until he absolutely feels so deeply heard, seen, and understood by you that your message can be seen and understood by him. So it means your message goes on the back burner. Your message goes on the back burner, and you stop lecturing, moralizing, preaching, trying to get him to see your side. You just stop it all. Commit yourself to him having the experience that you get him. And so you're really just saying back to him, I get it. So, but let me just check in to be sure that you feel like I really do get it. Because he'll tell you, if you start to say to him, so this is what you see, or this is how you see it. No, you just don't understand me. Oh my gosh. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Let me see if I can get it this time. And you hang in there so that he gets that experience of you finally get him. And then it's like, okay, now I get it. All right, that's great. And the rule is always and, never but. You say but to anybody, and it's like, now everything I just said doesn't matter, because all that matters is your perspective again. And it's back to the land of power over, and my perspective is the only perspective, and the dominant culture, and la. So I hope that helps that person, but that's how I work with it.
Well, Katherine, it's like, we know this is why you named this talk, Building Stronger Relationships with Your Child or Teen, because all night you have been emphasizing that the most important thing is the relationship with your child.
Yes, everything happens. That's the sweet spot. If you've got a good relationship with your child, they'll say, oh, all right, Mom. And they might change their behavior, not because they want to, but because they care about you, right? They care about the relationship. Yes. And that's really beautiful, because that is consideration.
And as I say to parents, remember, when they get to be teenagers, you're going to need to have some control sometimes. So you better have that relationship, because when you get there, you have to have trust, right? There's a parent asking about how you get kids to do college prep. Well, you've got to have built out that relationship, or you're not going to get them to write letters to teachers. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they have to see the value of it. And again, I would say, I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing, but I'm going to say there's a resentment flow there. Because you don't have to force people who haven't experienced, and here's the rub. Because I don't know parents who ever want to create a resentment flow. And if they're there, they didn't set out to make one. It happened not because of the intention to have it, but because there was actually the modality. There was no way to not have it because it's built into the structure of the modality. The behavioralist controlling form of discipline, I mean, we know this from all the research. It doesn't include the other person's perspective. And anybody whose perspective isn't being included, it's like they're the last. I feel like a child advocate. The children are the marginalized community that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
It's as if their needs are not as valuable,
Yeah.
as if they don't matter. Like somehow you're just supposed to subjugate your needs because you're only 11. Well, no, of course their needs matter just as much as ours. But I think for parents, it's been this idea, but it's oftentimes them honoring themselves may appear as inconsiderate, may appear as thoughtless, may appear as self-centered. And so it's navigating our perception and beginning to just wipe out the negative view of children, wipe it out. Notice it when you're doing it. It's going to pop up all the time. I've been doing this work for 30 years. It still pops up. So it's not like you just erase it. It's gone. No, you just become more aware of when it's happening. And you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I slipped into that. And, that's what I would like to say is just be gentle on yourselves. If anything, take away from this conversation today, the idea that, oh my gosh, I was in a context that had it this way. And I just played my part. And now I have the opportunity to have a completely different relationship when it comes to collaborative problem solving.
So, Katherine, you've given us so much wonderful advice tonight. Do you have any final parting thoughts for our attendees tonight?
Yeah, I wish I put it in. I didn't, but there's a beautiful poem. Marshall Rosenberg, who was the founder of the Center for Nonviolent Communication and a teacher of mine, and he has a poem called "See Me Beautiful." And I would just leave that with all of you, is when we're looking at these behaviors that we want to just, oh my gosh, we cannot believe it. And we're focusing on our experience of the behavior. See them beautiful. Look for the best in them. It's what they really are. If we can go past the signaling behaviors, past our experience of it, and that's a huge shift, to stop focusing on our experience of their tragic expression of their unmet needs and be like, okay, oxygen mask for me. Okay. I know I'm having an experience and I get to be with that. And now I can recognize that actually I need to get in my little boat because they're the ones drowning and they don't have any of the skills to manage it. And that shift, it's that shift.
Yes. Thank you, Katherine Sellery, for a really brilliant discussion tonight. Thank you, everybody who's been on with us again. I wish we had time for all of your questions because they were all wonderful, but we hope you've enjoyed it. This video will be available. I think I need to watch it about 3 more times. Thank you again, Katherine. Thank you.
You're so welcome. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was so great to have you with us tonight. Take care, everybody, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.